Alaska, a land of rugged beauty and untamed wilderness. It's a place where mountains meet the sea and history intertwines with mystery. Today, we're diving into one of the most intriguing transactions ever, the Alaska Purchase, where the United States purchased this vast territory from Russia. Often overshadowed by its nickname, Seward's Folly, this deal was far more than a simple land acquisition. In this video, we'll uncover the real reasons driving this purchase, its immediate impact, and how this gamble paid off in ways no one could ever have predicted. From strategic interests to untapped resources, join us as we unravel the true story of America's bold gamble on Alaska. Russian explorers first landed in Alaska in 1741. This expedition was led by Danish explorer Vitus Bering on behalf of the Russian Navy. It was part of the Great Northern Expedition, one of the largest and most expensive endeavors ever undertaken by Russia, aiming to explore and map the northern and eastern parts of Russia, including the Siberian coast and the North Pacific Ocean. Although he died before Bering's expedition, it was Peter the Great who originally commissioned the Great Northern Expedition as part of his broader vision to expand Russian knowledge and influence. Driven by exploration and a burgeoning fur trade after abundant sea otter populations were discovered, Russia established their first settlement in 1784 on Kodiak Island. This settlement marked the beginning of serious Russian colonization efforts in the region. These early years were characterized by the challenges of remote colonial administration, the exploitation of natural resources, building churches and spreading their faith, and complex interactions with native populations. While there were instances of cooperation between the Russians and indigenous peoples, especially in the fur trade, there were also many conflicts. The often harsh exploitation of native labor and the spread of diseases had a significant impact on indigenous communities. The US was also undergoing a phase of serious territorial expansion between 1803 and 1853, which included the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, securing Florida in 1821, Texas in 1845, Oregon in 1846, and parts of Mexico's territory following the Mexican-American War, along with many others. This American expansion was driven by various factors, including economic interests and strategic considerations. However, I would argue that the concept of manifest destiny was the true guiding force during this period. Manifest destiny was a widely held cultural belief in the 19th century United States, where American settlers were destined to expand across North America. This concept, which emerged in the 1840s, combined elements of nationalism, a belief in the superiority of the American democratic institutions, and a sense of divine providence. The legacy of manifest destiny is complex. While it contributed to the growth and development of the United States into a truly continent-spanning nation, it also had profound and often devastating impacts on indigenous populations and contributed to the sectional tensions that led to the American Civil War. Although the Russian colony had been expanding for decades, Russia eventually realized the need to divest itself of Alaska, a territory that had eventually become an economic liability, particularly following the costly Crimean War of 1853 to 1856, in which Russia fought against an alliance of several major powers, namely the Ottoman Empire, the United Kingdom, France, and the Kingdom of Sardinia. The war and subsequent defeat had taken a heavy toll on Russia, both in human lives and financially, severely depleting the nation's treasury and leading to substantial economic difficulties and debt. By the mid-1850s, then Tsar Alexander II was concerned about the vulnerability of Alaska in any potential future conflicts, particularly with Britain. Additionally, by this time, the profits from the North American colonies were in steep decline, and the overexploitation of the area's resources also severely depleted numbers of sea otters as well as populations of wolves, bears, and foxes. Given those challenges, the Tsar opted to sell the territory to a neutral entity such as the United States to avoid the risk of it being captured by British forces and being lost for nothing. The allure of acquiring Alaska for the United States in the period following the Civil War stemmed from a mix of strategic considerations, economic interests, such as natural resources and easy access to the enormous Asian markets, ideological beliefs, and nationalistic aspirations. This decision was driven not only by the immediate benefits offered by Alaska, but also by a broader perspective focused on the nation's future development and its role on the global stage. This potential deal represented an enormous opportunity for the United States. Alaska is more than twice the size of Texas, the second largest state. Its addition would dramatically alter the geographic profile of the United States, making it a much larger and geographically diverse nation, ultimately increasing its overall land area by a whopping 17%. The negotiation over the Alaska Purchase was a critical and intriguing part of the process, involving complex diplomacy and strategic maneuvering. Russia's issues administrating this vast North American territory were nothing new, and they had in fact offered to sell Alaska to the United States on several previous occasions. However, these never seriously progressed, and the discussions were again postponed at the outset of the American Civil War in 1861. However, things changed in late 1866, a year after the Civil War's conclusion. The Russians again decided to explore the possibility of a sale, and Tsar Alexander II reached out to one of the key figures in our story, Eduard de Stockel. Stockel was the Russian minister to the United States at the time, and the Tsar instructed him to open negotiations. Understanding his brief, Stockel approached one William Henry Seward, the US Secretary of State. It could be argued that Seward was the true driving force behind the deal. Seward was a well-known advocate for American expansion. A true visionary, he saw Alaska for something other than a faraway frozen land. He recognized the enormous potential of the territory and understood the economic and strategic potential lying beneath the surface. Private discussions on the sale began on March 11, 1867. These talks were carried out by the statesman under a veil of secrecy, as both sides readily anticipated political and public skepticism. After a series of intense discussions, Stockel and Seward completed the draft of a treaty ceding Russian North America to the United States in the wee hours of the morning of March 30, 1867. Figures of around $5 million had been floated previously. However, after further rounds of negotiations, the agreed price was finally set at $7.2 million, or approximately $125 million today, which amounted to about 2 cents per acre at the time. Although an enormous amount of money to be sure, this amount would represent an incredibly tiny fraction of what Alaska would be worth today. In fact, Buckingham Palace alone is estimated to be worth $4.9 billion, nearly 33 times the current value of what Russia received for the sale. Although, to be completely fair, the true value of Alaska was still unknown at the time. Sure, various geological surveys had been completed and showed some promise. However, the true value of what would later be found was only speculation. Additionally, Russia's willingness to get a deal done, and done quickly, can help explain the relatively small amount paid. Still, this deal reflected Seward's formidable diplomatic and negotiation skills, and also Stockel's pragmatic understanding of the political and economic realities facing Russia at the time. Despite the successful negotiation, Seward still faced the challenge of convincing the US Senate to ratify the treaty. There was considerable opposition, mocking the purchase of what they saw as a frozen wasteland. Despite the criticism, Seward's efforts paid off. He lobbied intensively for the treaty's ratification, that allegedly included paying various bribes to gain support, making sure to emphasize the strategic and economic potential of Alaska. The Senate approved the treaty by a vote of 37-2 on April 9, 1867. The Alaska Purchase stands out as a remarkable example of 19th century diplomacy, characterized by strategic foresight, skilled negotiation, and the overcoming of considerable political opposition. It reflected both the expansionist ambitions of the United States and the pragmatic considerations of the Russian Empire. On October 18, 1867, Alaska was officially acquired by the United States, a historic event celebrated annually as Alaska Day. Alaska's journey under US stewardship began under military control, transitioning through various authorities before forming a civil government in 1884. The few Russians living in the region went back to Russia, and those who stayed faced a decision on their future in this new American land. When the Alaska Purchase was first announced, the American reaction was quite varied. with some newspapers generally supportive of the purchase. However, others were downright skeptical and even mocking. They believed that the territory was a distant, barren, and frigid land, leading to the deal being derisively nicknamed Stewart's Folly or Stewart's Icebox. Others at the time believed Seward's deal to be a wasteful investment in a region that appeared to offer little in terms of resources or strategic value. Additionally, the political landscape at the time contributed to the opposition. The purchase occurred under President Andrew Johnson's administration, which was mired in controversy and political strife. This association led some members of Congress to oppose the deal, not necessarily on its merits, but as a broader rejection of Johnson's policies. However, this perception of Alaska and the purchase decision began to shift towards the end of the 19th century and into the early 20th century. The discovery of gold in the Klondike in the 1890s dramatically altered the image of Alaska. What was once seen as a barren wasteland was now viewed as a land rich in economic potential, teeming with valuable minerals and later oil. The strategic importance of Alaska also became more apparent, especially during World War II and the Cold War. Its proximity to Russia and its position in the North Pacific underscored its value as a strategic military location. In modern times, there's a broad appreciation of Alaska for its natural beauty, environmental importance, and rich cultural heritage. The state's national parks, diverse wildlife, and unique ecosystems have become cherished assets, valued for their ecological significance and as major draws for tourism. In retrospect, the initial doubts and criticisms of the Alaska purchase have given way to an acknowledgement of the territory's immense value, both in terms of natural resources and strategic positioning, underscoring it as a wise and visionary investment for the United States. Our story ends on January 3rd, 1959, a full 92 years after taking possession of the territory. Alaska's star was finally added to the US flag as the 49th state, completing this important chapter in American history.